Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're talking about the full moon in the third decan of Cancer. I'm joined here today by my good friend Sam Belyea. How you doing today, Sam?
Doing really great.
So we're going to be breaking down the full moon that's happening on January the 17th. We're going to touch briefly on the last quarter moon on the 25th of January. We've got all sorts of different
Hello there, friends. This is
divination.
Spencer Michaud,
We've got all
and
sorts of
today we're talking.
divination uh, forms that we're going to be bringing to you with the I-Ching, with tarot, and with some stuff that Sam is an expert in as well. And we're going to be examining that also. So let us know where you're coming from in the chat box here, where you're joining us from. We've got some people joining us from all around the world, which is very exciting. Just going to shout out a few of them real quick. We've got Cookerzilla coming from Nova Scotia. Welcome, Cookerzilla. Andrea Azanic is here from Croatia. Welcome, my friend Andrea. Jody is here from South Florida. I think that's where you're joining us from, right, Sam? So we've got another fellow Floridian. Tarja is here from Finland. And yeah, so always love hearing where you're joining us from and where, you're listening in through the different parts of the world. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words a little bit today. We could feel that Mercury stationing already. like, so Sam, my friend, help me out here. Save me. Tell me a little bit more about yourself
Sure.
and what your expertise is.
So I got introduced to astrology when I was 16 and apprenticed at a metaphysical shop, which was probably the coolest first job ever. And they stuck various books in my hands, and astrology was the one thing where I opened up the pages and the words kind of sunk into my skin.
Mhm.
And I've never really been able to shake it. I've always done readings for friends and family. And as I sought to create professional community around astrology for myself, it's just been this lovely experience where I discover that my language is kind of rooted in the stars, and it's how I choose to communicate spiritually, as well as just kind of personally with the planets and working through that form of divine connection. So I also have a background in bodywork. I've started in physical therapy and moved into massage therapy, and so I'm well-traveled and taught and published author in the reflexology space, and a lot of my astrology also blends in the medical side, because the body, I think, is our first temple, and so kind of being rooted in something physical and also reaching up to the stars and having that kind of as above so below feel to it is definitely part of my the unique way that I look at astrology, not just as a metaphysical art but also as a physical one.
Absolutely. I love the balance there. Actually, the two cards that I pulled today, I usually pull a tarot card for the day. One personal and one for the overarching theme. I got temperance for both of them today, which
For
is
sure.
which is sort of like, balancing out body, spirit, all of these things and having the proper, you know, the right mixture of things. So I love that. I love hearing that. Um, okay, so we are looking at your website. Where can we find you? And what kind of things may you have coming in the hopper here?
Sure. So my website is just my first and last name, so sambelyea.com. You can also find me on Facebook as primary platform, and then Instagram as well, Sam Belyea 333, and then Twitter, just it's Scorpio Rising SB is the handle. But if you just Google my name or search the name, it should come right up. And most of my practice is revolving around the daily horoscopes. So I write a kind of transit picture for the day, and then I also write bullet point 1 or 2 sentence horoscopes for each sign, for the non-astrological people to kind of keep in touch with the planets. And as far as stuff that's coming up, I don't really have a lot of astrology classes coming up because my reflexology work is taking me over to the UK for a third time at the end of February and March. It's my first international travel since lockdown, so that'll be super fun. And my second reflexology book just dropped in December, but I am working on my first ever astrology book as well, the Astrologer's Manual. So that should be my next project, which will probably be about a year or two out.
Nice. Yeah, you are uber productive, Sam. I've been following along with your daily horoscopes, which are amazing, by the way. I love that you're bringing in, the kind of the body temple with those as well. But man, you're just churning stuff out. It's really great to see. I love seeing someone who is committed to the art like that, and is able to constantly show up for the work. So good job, my friend. I'm a fan.
Well, and echoed right back at you, like your level of productivity is also something that I strive to aspire to one day. I love how we as astrologers, when we get into it, it's no longer about work. It's also about kind of this becomes our practice, and that for me is exactly how the horoscope started. Was I did this every morning anyway, so why not kind of share it with the world? And it's the same thing. You carve out these 90 minutes to sit and reflect and throw cards and look at the charts and divine what's going to happen over the next month. Any spiritual practitioner is familiar with that ritual.
Absolutely.
So it's just nice that we now get to share it with a bigger audience.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, so I'm looking at the chat here. We've got a few more people joining us that I'll shout out here. We've got Dimfy's joining us from the Netherlands. Hello, Dimfy. Susanna is here from Finland. We've got a crew that joins us from Finland every week, which is very
Nice.
cool. Place of Stillness is here from Sweden, so our Nordic friends are coming today. And Fion is here from Ireland. Hello, my friend. Okay, so more business stuff to get out of the way. I do have my Decans of Capricorn webinar that is coming up this Saturday, January the 15th at 1 p.m. There is a link if you'd like to sign up for that, or for the winter bundle where you can sign up for Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces and then get a discount. So I'm really excited about that. I've been going deep into Capricorn archetypes like the mythology, some of the more esoteric meanings with the tarot cards and things of that nature. So hopefully you'll join me for that. Also, one other thing I wanted to alert all of you out there is that I've agreed to become part of Stormy Grace's YouTube Astrology Academy, which is basically a free service to start learning astrology. So there's all sorts of different teachers that are going to be joining Stormy on her channel, Stormy Grace Astrology, and we'll be teaching, various webinars here and there. I think I might be doing something on the moon. It's not confirmed yet, but we'll see what happens because we do these new and full moons. So, but there's a link in the description of this video if you'd like to support the Kickstarter that will help fund bringing in all these astrologers to make this content free for people on the internet. So you can find that in the description below. All right, I think that's the business stuff that we have getting out of the way here. Thank you all for your support out there in digital land, and please visit Sam and support the work that he does as well. All right, Sam, should we dive into it?
Love it.
So I'm going to share my screen, and we have can you see that there, Sam?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so we are looking at January the 17th, 2022 at about 6:48 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've got the sun at 27 degrees of Capricorn in the third decan and the moon at 27 degrees of Cancer, exactly opposite one another. Pluto co-present. We've got Saturn hosting the sun and the moon in its own domicile. Any big picture thoughts you have right away, Sam?
And we were talking about this a little bit as I pulled the chart and as I just kind of stared at it and sat with it and just kind of let it wash over me. I adore a moon in Cancer, and especially a full moon in Cancer, and especially this being our first full moon in Cancer without an angry Saturn.
Right.
It's definitely going to be a lighter moon, a moon that is a little bit more kind of cradling that maternal instinct. Will be able to fly forward a little bit. But what kept pulling my awareness was that the sun is co-present after that conjunction with Pluto, god of the underworld, lord of the subconscious, everything that has been buried and swept under the rug, and the sun backlighting those things. So this is not a passive moon in any way, shape, or form. This is not a fluffy bunny moon. This is one of those moons that will likely, through the waves of Cancer, kind of wash up ashore a lot of dead bodies. With the underworld theme still being so fresh, but also on either side of that Sun and Pluto conjunction is retrograde Mercury and retrograde Venus. Venus just about to come out of her retrograde period, Mercury just about to start his. And so together they create this sense of not entrapment, but this warning label of what you think is correct now is not actually for the highest good. And we need to take a step back. We need to rewind. And sometimes taking those 2 steps back is actually moving forward just under a different label.
Which is perfect for the Cancer archetype, right? With the way that the crab
the
will
sideways
move.
movement.
Yeah, that they move on the beach, going a little forward, a little back, testing the waters, always being hyper aware of danger on some level as well. I wanted to, hearing you speak, I wanted to step back for a second and just look at this new moon that is coming to fruition, just to review real quick, because I think it's, you're touching on a lot of the themes that we saw here. So with this new moon, we had, the second decan of Capricorn with the 3 of Pentacles card, which was sort of about the blueprint. And we had Venus kind of moving backwards, saying, what do we value as far as the structures of our life, the Saturnian structures? How do we administrate these different things? And one of the things I talked about with Andrea, who is here with us today, is there's a danger of becoming overly ambitious with this particular decan. It's a Mars decan with an exalted Mars and Capricorn type of vibe to it. And I think that we're seeing that come to fruition here with this full moon. And we'll go back for a second. I just want to kind of look at it because that gives me a little context here. Because what we're seeing here is like, okay, I think that the thing that was coming up in my mind the most was, what is enough? That word kept cycling over and over again through the different things I was reading. And, if we look at this 4 of Pentacles card that represents Cancer 3, the third decan of Cancer between 20 and 30 degrees, we have the figure who's refusing the 4th cup of, spirit, of divine, of abundance potentially. And you and I were talking about like feeling like, okay, we've made some progress, maybe we've gotten some goodies, but it may not be bringing us the satisfaction that we were hoping for. And then we're kind of like, we're like the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, who experienced, abundance and wealth and, almost like protected, was a protected youth. And then eventually they were like, oh, well, this isn't bringing me happiness. Like, what do we do now? And I get that vibe with this too, this full moon.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking about, and yeah, do you have things to add to that before I move on?
I think that analogy and bringing up the Buddha story is so relevant here because it is that opposing opposites, right? The mother of Cancer and the father of Capricorn always at odds with each other. The kind of stereotypical maternal paternal archetype, and in that idea of the Buddha. And what is too much, what is too little, his path of asceticism, and the string that is too tight snaps, the string that is too loose cannot play a sound, and finding that balance, right? I think what maybe that 3 of Pentacles showed us was that we were being a little bit too ambitious, and now we're starting to see the results of that over ambition. And like we were talking about before, that Mercury just about to square Uranus, just about to get itself into trouble, just about to overextend itself, just about to Icarus itself a little bit too close to the sun.
I love that that's an adjective. I love that as an adjective. Icarusing yourself. That's perfect.
I mean, it's kind of like Mercury got into Aquarius and is like, yeet, we're going. Like it's out of Capricorn, out of the now with the support of Saturn underneath it, which is even more tempting because it has the backbone of its Lord, but Mercury's like, something's not right. I feel like there are strands of fate that are still tethered to me. There's something else underneath the surface that we're not yet seeing, which I think that Sun Pluto conjunction will actually bring to light and
Sure.
start to show us, like, hey, there were missteps. We didn't perform correctly the first time. So now it's time to kind of give into that yin, Venus restoring her power and going direct and moving through and kind of healing and sweeping and restoring and filling in the gaps,
Yeah.
while Mercury starts to do that reflective contemplative work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that what I'm seeing with the sun moving through Capricorn 3 now, I always think of like the sun as our collective spotlight, right? It's saying what as a community, what kind of themes are we going to be conscious of and have to deal with, right? And I've been over the last few weeks, I have a daughter in high school, and there's been all this back and forth about going back to school in person versus staying at home. My partner has been having these conversations with the bureaucracy that she is a part of at her work about whether it's safe to go into the workplace or staying home. And what I've noticed, as both Venus and the Sun have made contact with Pluto or are about to,
Mhm.
is that the system, it's harder for the system to pivot as quickly as the needs of the people may require. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's the analogy that I'll often give for Pluto and Capricorn throughout this whole period that it's been in this space is this just gigantic mangrove tree,
Yeah.
with its roots so deep that it's actually innervating the graves, below. And you can't pull up those roots easily. They are established, they are ingrained, they are, years of little actions compiled into one. And so to think that you can topple, these authority structures, even if they are ruled by Saturn, there is that idea of making sure that you don't waste your breath trying to blow down a brick wall.
Oh man, that's perfect. Yeah, it's just been playing out, I think, in our reality here, in our family, just as seeing people. Here's another like tangible example, because I like to share these tangible examples.
Yeah.
There was a pandemic response team at the work that my partner was at,
Mm.
and instead of having an emergency meeting, they were like, "Well, we can't have a meeting for another week, and we can't move it up. So we're going to stick to the established policy that we've had throughout this whole pandemic, which." Because of things like how contagious the new variant Omicron is, needed to be dealt with immediately, right? And that to me was such a poignant example of like, okay, like the powers that be, the machinations of industry or whatever are grinding like this, and they're like, oh, we don't want to deal with this, like and I think one of the themes of this Four of Pentacles is we're seeing like someone who I think you could compare this figure to King Midas on some level, where everything that they touch is turning to gold. And is that good or not? Like I've been really doing a lot of study in the Kabbalistic tree of life recently.
Sure.
And these two fours correspond with the Sephirot, or like the energy center, Hesed. And Hesed is that loving kindness, the flow of love between one another, or the flow of divine energy. And in one, we have someone who's like maybe even blocking this or trying to hold on too tightly. And the other, we've got someone just refusing it altogether. So there's this, this what is inside the walls versus what are we keeping away from ourselves. So I think just the point being with that is that sometimes we have a plan that we want to move forward and have progress with, but as this moon is saying, is flexibility is important. Like the Cancerian symbol, the crab, it isn't always linear. And you were pointing that out earlier, is that sometimes in life we can't just always keep grinding up the mountain. Like there's a time for that. but we also have to be flexible. And this is something we've talked about a lot in our family, is the flexibility of the, I guess you'd call it, I don't know if I want to call it the air age, but since Jupiter and Saturn have made those conjunctions in air signs now, which only happens every few hundred years, it changes elements. It's definitely different than that Earth, kind of centric experience we had before that, where you could, make a plan and reasonably,
Right.
go forward with it, right?
I love that analogy of Hesed, because when having done a lot of the Kabbalistic work in last year, that was a big kind of spiritual framework for me as I took those lessons. Hesed is the open sky and the open ocean. Like, you're sitting there in between the two, floating, and anything you speak becomes, it's so overwhelming because of that hyper connection to the divine. But it magnifies everything that you don't like about yourself at the same time. And that contrast can be really scary, as we start to focus on the ease that is the potential of Jupiter in Pisces as a great example, and we are met with these parts of ourselves that are still not in working order. There's just that deeper reflection, that deeper understanding of, crap, we wanted so bad for things to be smooth going forward, but there's still work to do.
Yeah, it's, I think that everyone is having an endurance test right now, it's not necessarily a sprinter's energy, it's marathon energy. And I think that one thing we should acknowledge, I try to be as balanced on this show as I can, as far as trying to see multiple perspectives and take everyone's thoughts and feelings into account. I think that one thing I wanted to say to the audience today is that, man, you've been through a lot, and we've all been through a lot. And I think that it's understandable that a lot of people out there are fatiguing, and are starting to be like, oh, when is this going to be done? And are feeling that kind of desire to escape the reality of Saturn here with the Jupiter principle, where we want it to be a certain way, right? Because it's been really hard. And I think that one thing that I try not to do is that concept of spiritual bypassing, where we can say, oh, well, if you only believe hard enough or have enough faith, all the bad things in your life are going to go away, because that's not acknowledging people's lived experience, right? True. And I think sometimes when we acknowledge people's lived experience, that can be some of the most healing things of all, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess that's what I wanted to say just in the middle here, is that I think a lot of people have been doing the best that they can under really difficult circumstances. And I hope that we'll all get through this together. I think that's the real takeaway, is hang in there a little bit longer, right? I think that's what Sam and I are both saying on this, on some level, right? We've got to realize that this isn't a linear path, and that flexibility is really important around this period of time too, since we have this very Saturnian stack up here, which can get crystallized. We have to be flexible. Like I don't know, do you share some of your chart placements, Sam?
Yep.
Okay, so we're both Cancer suns, right? So we've lived this kind of like, all right, well, maybe life isn't this linear path, right? And you got the beautiful, man, your chart is one of the most dignified charts I think I've ever seen,
For sure. Yeah.
So I'm really and you carry it really well, man. I'm really appreciating your insights here today. You're a very talented astrologer, so thank you so much for being my guest here today. But you seem to be tapping into the best parts of Jupiter with that exalted Jupiter that you have in your chart in Cancer, and realizing that sometimes we have to nurture. We have to be flexible. We have to not necessarily get attached to one particular path, which I think can be some of the downfall of a Capricorn energy, is getting so fixated on one, sometimes material path, that we end up losing our integrity along the way. right?
Yeah.
I want to tell a story real quick, and then I'm going to toss this back to you. One of the stories of Capricorn is the story of Precus. Are you familiar with the Precus myth?
Yes.
Right? It's perfect for this. So Precus was the king of the sea goats, who were half goat and half fish. And one of the things in my research that I've been doing, I'm thinking a lot about the Capricorn symbol as the goats of Precus climbing out of the sea and changing into land form. It's not that they're just these half fish, half goat. It's the process of climbing out of the ocean of maybe divinity and into material form. And that to me was a big light bulb moment, because in this Precus story, his children are goats in the sea, or sea goats, or whatever they are, and they keep trying to ascend. They want to ascend. They want to climb, and they keep leaving. And once they leave the sea, they lose their ability to speak, and they lose their ability to think, and they become just more of their base animal self, which we can see reflected in another symbol of Capricorn, which is the devil card. So this was another connection I made this week, is that the devil card has a similarity to the Four of Pentacles, because the king in the Four of Pentacles is wearing sort of the like furry coat of the beast here, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I thought that was really fascinating. Like, and they're both sitting on this throne. They're both like chained to matter, and they're getting fixated on matter rather than with the pentacle that is within the matter, the spirit within the matter. So I think that, with the Precus story, these goats are leaving. They're ambitious, but they're leaving behind their spirit, their soul. They're trying to build this temple to wherever through material means, and this is talked about a lot in the Tower of Babel story as well, where it's, if you're trying to ascend to some kind of point of consciousness, yes, that you might have to balance out taking material steps, which I think that that's another thing I've been really trying to reconcile, is not demonizing the material world, right? But also not getting, overly attached to it. I wanted to share with all of you that today, my two cards of the day were temperance, both cards. Like, I pick a card of the day and a personal card, and I got temperance twice, which is that achemical mixture of trying to figure out the right balance in our life. So that Precus story just really affects me with this Capricorn full moon, as far as like, what are we really striving for? I think that word is a good one too. I hear that a lot in the I-Ching, striving. And that's one of the things that I-Ching is like, come into alignment with the Tao rather than striving, right? So I'll toss that back to you here, Sam.
Yeah, I love that. And just to put a little bit of heartstring on it from a Cancer perspective, the Precus story is also really just super much about that sensitivity, because as he witnesses his children losing themselves to matter, he rewinds time, a very Saturnian concept,
Right.
in order to reverse the process. And it's this grief of the parent watching something that they know is inevitable, but they keep trying to literally unbalance nature in order to get a different outcome. And this plays so well into the retrogrades surrounding the sun during the full moon. Is we, at this point at least, there is a necessary rewind. There is a necessary going back, because we haven't absorbed mentally, emotionally, all of the lessons that need to be kind of sunk in before the alignment happens. After this transit, and we start to get everything kind of piling back up, Mars moves into exaltation in Capricorn, conjoins Venus, Mercury goes direct, everything piles up in Aquarius, Sun conjoins Jupiter, and we get this rush, the rush we were expecting, but that we weren't ready for. And I think it is this idea of like, okay, hold the phone. We clearly were overexcited. We clearly were ready to start something new. But we were unaware of what needed to occur in order for that to truly take root. And this was actually my meditation on Capricorn the other day, because it's a big Capricorn lesson month for me in my spiritual training. And so delving into that sign on many different levels. The idea of Capricorn representing hardness, and the necessary hardness of life that needs to be not worked through, but bowed to. And what Capricorn does so beautifully is approach you at a time in your life when you do not have the answers, and puts a wall in front of you and says, try. Because it knows that you can't win. It knows that there's nowhere to go. It knows that you are at an inherent disadvantage, but you don't see that. And so Capricorn's job is to approach you and say, are you ready now? Now that you've fatigued yourself, now that you've worn yourself out, now that you've exhausted every option, are you ready to bow in order to ascend? And it's such a pivotal kind of crux, because what we're seeing is this half-bakedness in the chart getting ready to resolve. But the conflict emotionally that we have to go through to be like, we're not done. Sure. You know, Midas realizing the gift that he thought was a gift is actually a curse. That Cancer moon in the last decan of Cancer being like, I'm full of the wrong stuff, I need to purge. You know, all of this not enoughness coming forward, and us realizing that, you know, between the sea of Jupiter and the sky of Saturn and Aquarius, we sit restless and need another round of reevaluation before we can actually move in.
That's beautiful, Sam. It's beautiful stuff there. I'm just trying to take that in. I'm trying to reflect on the profoundness of your sharing there. I think that, one of the things that's really standing out to me with what you're talking about is, you know, the need for the Capricorn archetype to almost be your own parent, right? Where you're thrust into positions where the nurturing that you expected isn't available. You know?
Expectation, right? For sure.
And I think the difference between Capricorn and Cancer is, and I know this personally as living this archetype, is we're kind of looking for a little bit of a mom figure sometimes, and funnily enough, sometimes we get it. Like, that's the other thing. Like, I know in my life, I've had really supportive women in my life in particular that have, you know, helped me through very tough times, where I will share, you know, my daughter is a Capricorn with a third decan Capricorn sun, and she had almost the opposite experience where, you know, the people that she needed at pivotal moments in her life, like, were like not available, and she had to rely on her own resources and her own ability to come to terms with that reality. And that's powerful. I mean, it's very, that can harden you against the world sometimes. And I think that's the really the biggest, the crux of the difference between, you know, being born in the winter when things are tough. And, you know, this is a time where being conservative is important, because, you know, the earth is not producing in the same way as when you and I were born in the height of summer, where the abundance is everywhere, and it's you tapping into this. So yeah, it's this is a really fascinating moon cycle, I think, from that perspective. The other thing I will add with the Cancer moon and just the Cancer archetype in general is the other thing that I like about one of my favorite astrologers is Liz Green. So I read a ton of Liz Green. I really love her storytelling, and she talks about Cancer as this Ouroboros incest is the word that she used, which is an intense word, but she's talking about a desire or a yearning to return to the divine womb. Okay, that is one of the main themes that she talks about with Cancer, is this longing, this like it's, and when you're young, you may think about this as like a yearning for the past or nostalgia or something like that, which I definitely felt as a young person. But then that realization like flipped a switch in my brain as well. It was, oh, okay, it doesn't matter what it is that we're longing for. The crux of it is that we want to return to oneness. We want to return to the ocean. Whereas, isn't it funny? Here's where it gets really interesting. The Capricorn wants to leave the sea,
Right.
like, and the Cancer wants to go back to it. So, to me, that is, I'm just laughing because they're like, okay, now it makes sense. All the pieces are fitting together. So, how do we reconcile that in our own, lives of this, trying to climb out of this divine oneness, and really the need at this full moon to maybe take a step back and say, well, where are we getting the moisture? Where are we getting the spirit of this? Have we just gotten so attached to our throne of matter that we're willing to do anything, like, to achieve it? I think that's been the biggest thing that's been shocking to me over the course of the last month or so, is that some of the bureaucratic structures in our country don't care what happens as long as the machine of industry keeps on rolling. They don't care if people die. They don't care if people get sick. As long as the GDP keeps increasing, they will literally put our children in danger to do that. And that, to me, is like the most horrifying thing I think I've ever experienced in my life. So it's a really difficult thing to be witnessing. At the same time, I can also appreciate that everyone's situation is different, and there are definitely some folks out there that they don't have any choice, and they have to go and try to make a living. I'll get real, like, progressive for a second here, but like, I was having this conversation with another friend. I was like, I think the real answer is just maybe we need to start giving a universal basic income to people so they're not forced to have to go in and make each other sick and, like, basically put their life on the line just to make basic ends meet. So, and people will have different political stances on that, but I think that even if that's not the solution, just thinking about it in terms of how can we bring humanity back to this situation, and, like, really helping on how do we find nurturing in this very Saturnian time, I guess is the basic part of it.
And I think that conversation is so perfect, because Cancer, of course, wants to rush to the aid of absolutely everybody.
Right.
And, let's all return to the ocean. Let's all get back to the nest. Let's cuddle up and kumbaya and, make sure that we're emotionally safe, fed, and loved. And this is what I love about moons that are so close to the cusp, because we also find the solution in the progression, right? The next sign. So the solution of the moon in Cancer, who has opposed the sun in Capricorn, realized the deep roots of the mangrove, cannot erode it, cannot push it down, can't do anything but feel sorry for themselves. What is the next step? The next step is to enter Leo. The next step is to enter unconditional love for the situation. The next step is to burn bright. The next step is to shine, is to reflect the light of the sun, and to create that lunar solar balance and make that hearth fire even stronger, but from an active way. Do something about it, right? Yeah. And likewise with Capricorn. Capricorn moves into Aquarius. The best way to harden Capricorn is to diamondize it in Aquarius, to crystallize, to take that hard earth, that raw coal, and refine it into something sharper, more fierce, more single-pointed, without the dense restrictions of the material world, but something that is so able to pierce and fly, and is light enough to kind of make rapid change. So this dynamic of the moon, it is both the problem, but also the solution, because it's right on that edge. We are so close to tasting that transformation, that transition. And I think that if we kind of look at who Cancer becomes in the procession of the zodiac, and who Capricorn then becomes, and we start to lean into that dynamic of, the sometimes accused as being hypersensitive, definitely maternal, definitely hyperprotective energy of Cancer, the shell gets shed, and the heart gets exposed. And when the heart is exposed to oxygen, it bursts into flame. And we get that fixed fire of Leo, which is able to do things that Cancer could not. And likewise with Capricorn and Aquarius. Aquarius also accused of being one of the most dispassionate signs of the zodiac, so removed and unempathetic, but also able to accomplish the greatest of scientific innovation and heights through its weird, quirky, otherworldly attachment to the skies.
Through objectivity. When you see how the rules of the game, or when you see how the game is played, you can bend the rules a little bit, right?
Capricorn is so focused on chopping down the tree, and Aquarius sees the whole forest, and it's just it's a different perspective. And so I think that the real solution is just to continue the dance of transformation, to continue the progress, but also recognizing that the reason why, we're in this wheel of samsara, we're in this constant cycle, is because nothing is supposed to be perfect. And the dichotomy is real. The obstacle is the way, and all that jazz.
Well, yeah. Again, I'll just take a moment to digest all of that. First of all, I wanted to say, I love that you use Florida metaphors, like the mangrove, because I've been to the Keys before. I've spent a little bit of time in the Keys in the past, and I could see the mangrove forests that you're talking about, and I'm just waiting for the manatees, to make an appearance in this, and it's beautiful though, and I think that it really is rooted in a realization that we can draw upon the genus loci of our space, right? That if we're truly connected in this way, we can see the divine in our physical space. So I really appreciate the way that you're spinning this yarn here. It's very deft. Is that the word? Is that the proper word I could say?
Well, and I always love that, because so many of our popular astrologers are not from the South.
Yeah.
And so I'm here, it's literally 75 degrees, there is no snow whatsoever, nor will there be snow ever. And I could go down to the beach and see a manatee right now. I just posted my picture of the moon in Taurus, sextiling Neptune, and Jupiter in Pisces as a big old manatee in the river, for one of my most recent horoscopes. So, but then the opposite of that is Saturn in Aquarius, the snow-topped mountain. It's totally these natural references. And what I think astrology does really well is it's a pattern of speaking and understanding the world that can be the most philosophical, it can be the most political, it can be the most family oriented, it can be the most natural. There's a vocab and a context for wherever you would like to take the astrology. And a good astrologer's job is to really crack the code in a way that makes sense to the client, so that you as a person can feel more attuned to these cycles, regardless of where you would like to relate these planetary shifts to. There's something in your life, something in your background, something in your genius loci, the spirit of your local space, that is that kind of spiritual connection point. Yeah.
And this is one thing I've been trying to teach on this channel too, is the concept of oracular space that you create with the client. There's the chart, there's you, the astrologer, and there's what is created between both of those, or that triad. It's something completely new and completely different. And I agree 100% that our job as diviners is to be able to find a way to communicate the insights in a way that the client can receive it, not in a way that inflates our own ego. It's in a way that, what do we really want do we want to connect? That's where the real connection comes in. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the chat here. This is fun, Sam.
Yeah.
Really excited to have you on the show.
I figured we would have good chemistry. It just seems like we were a little bit better than anticipated.
No, it's good stuff. I really appreciate your insights. So I'm seeing we've got poetry snaps here. I love that. Thank you, Raven. Lisa is floored by this interpretation of Capricorn, exactly her perspective. Lisa also is a great mind that has some really great insights in the chat every week. Um, let's see. We've got people. Susanna's pointing out there's so many great Cancer Sun astrologers in
Mhm.
our community. I agree. Like,
Yeah,
I'm partial. I'm biased, but
yeah.
yes, I think that there is something that we're. I think that the Cancer being disposed of by the moon is a lot of our job is trying to connect with the masses and trying to interpret the light of the divine and deliver it to the people. That's what I feel is a lot of my role is to collect whatever insights are out there and deliver it in a way that is easily digestible. And I think that's part of the moon's energy as well, as collecting that divine light and infusing it into a body to be eaten or to be consumed or to be, I don't know,
Mhm.
worn. Like
Yeah,
these spacesuits that we're working with here.
I love
So
that physical analogy, and also I think as astrologers, the baseline of any consultative practice is empathy, and
yes,
Cancer is just, it's not that we have the monopoly on it, but we certainly are one of the more well-equipped signs to navigate really emotional spaces without judgment. And when you're one-on-one with a client, and you're talking about their life, front and back, side to side, it helps to be able to kind of instinctively know how to hold that space.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is a healing conversation because I spent a little bit too much time on social media the other day on one of these like joke meme accounts
Yeah.
where they posted something about a cancer men. Like, and I knew it was a joke, but I still was like, ouch, ouch, that hurts. Like, so for all you cancer people out there, this is just the love fest for you today. And know that your opinion and your contribution is valued, even if some people may misinterpret or not always appreciate our caring or our some other mothers. Like, so
Hmm. For sure.
so all right. Okay, so I'm seeing some great comments here. Thank you everyone for your sharing in the comments. Thank you. And Anise is saying Aquarius is a very misunderstood sign as well. Its passion is mental and strong. The detachment comes from Saturn. I absolutely agree. One thing I want to add to that Aquarius thought is I like to see Aquarius as sort of the platonic forms that we're drawing upon, the blueprint that maybe Saturn as or that Jupiter as demiurge wants to create from. So since we've got the Saturn on the outside of the planetary sphere model, you've got Jupiter drawing things down from that Saturnian, really idealistic realm. This is one thing that I think people may mistake about Saturn too, is it's very idealistic. It was
Hmm.
like he was the leader of the golden age in mythology, like this like land of milk and honey where everything was good. And there is this kind of like looking forward and backwards quality to Saturn, maybe trying to bring that back into our experience or organize the systems of our life. We've got, let's see, yeah, we've got more Cancer Club people checking in. All right, cool. So thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate all the contributions in the chat. If you would like to make a material donation to the show, there's a little $sign in the chat box that's called a super chat or a super sticker. That helps us keep the lights on here. I appreciate all of the support that you all have provided in the past. That's my little Capricorn, like ringing the bell for today, which is not comfortable for us Cancerians. I will say 100%. It is not a comfortable thing, but um, everyone's got to eat. So let's move forward, Sam. And one last thing I wanted to say about this moon before we move on to another portion of this. This decan of Cancer, the main themes that Austin Coppock talks about in 36 Faces is luxury versus scarcity. And I wanted to bring into the discussion the goddess Hecate. Are you familiar with Hecate?
Oh, for sure.
So I want to hear your thoughts on Hecate because you really have good thoughts on all sorts of different stuff. That you have a Gemini Mercury, right?
Yep.
So you are giving me all the different. I love how you pull from all these different traditions. It's near and dear to the Venus and Gemini heart that I have. So they're talking about Hecate as being a lunar goddess that both is nurturer and destroyer, the
Right.
goddess of the crossroads, and kind of this like feeling like, what are we doing with the abundance that we have once we've satisfied desire, and then we get maybe bored with it or something like that. I think that we're thinking about the cycle of desire and satisfaction, of having our desires satiated, and then, maybe figuring out, well, what is next? Tell me more about your experience with Hecate and maybe this theme of luxury versus scarcity.
So it's interesting to me because Hecate is obviously one of the grand archetypes of magic in general. And so many practitioners go to her first as the maternal figure of the dark arts and of the occult. When we're seeking navigation through the shadows, there is Hecate, who is not just goddess of dark, she is the torchbearer. She is the keeper of the keys. She has her hounds that guide you through the deepest, darkest parts of the underworld. She is as much a guide as she is an ominous presence. So she does balance that maiden mother crone aspect. She is Hecate thrice, in that aspect. So what I love about this perspective of Hecate and the third decan of Cancer is the myth of Persephone. And so Hecate and her role in that myth is actually very neurodivergent and very much kind of like guest starry, but so pivotal, because every time Demeter goes to consult Hecate, Hecate basically just kind of babbles to herself in her kind of altered state. She's like, and the wheel turns, and the wheel turns. And she's basically saying, like, don't worry about it, everything changes, which is like the last thing that you want to tell a grieving mother. But it is this idea of, you get so comfortable in your abundance, you get so comfortable in the lap of luxury, and then you want more. Like, how could this possibly be better? But the wheel has to turn, and Hecate is the guardian of that deeper wisdom, because without understanding the death and the ebb and the release of what we had, we can't fully appreciate it in the moment. We get complacent.
Bingo. Yes. And for those of you who aren't completely familiar with the Persephone Demeter myth, the cliff notes are that, Demeter, was searching for her lost daughter Persephone, who had been swallowed by Hades into the underworld. And correct me if I'm, fudging any details on this, Sam. And then eventually Hecate was providing the torches to go into the underworld to find Persephone, and had the keys to unlock, various gateways here. Tell me more about the mumbling of, speaking in tongues almost.
So I attended Temple Fest in my tradition back before COVID happened, and we had the most lovely guest speaker who was Wendy Rule, who is an Australian native, and she created an entire musical album dedicated to the myth of Persephone.
Nice.
And in her describing the myth and the tales from vantage points that, like, she had obviously been meditating on this for such a long time. She's like, reading through the texts in Greek and reading through the actual kind of retelling of the myths from the sources that we have Hecate is so much an ambivalent character. She's kind of coming in and out of focus throughout the whole thing, not necessarily attached to assisting Hades or Demeter in this kind of conflict. She's the neutral force that is basically just saying, and the wheel turns. Everything will right itself. Everything will wrong itself. Don't worry about it.
And maybe that's a meditation on, us not trying to force the issue here as a community as well. With the Capricorn sun and the Venus retrograding through Capricorn, as this wheel will continue to spin, and we need to maybe kind of come into alignment with the reality principle of what is required of us, rather than what we wish it to be, right?
This is what I love about Aquarius as well, because as a sign, Aquarius does something truly beautiful in that it collects all the data, and then it makes that strike that is so calculated, more precise than even some of our most calculating signs like Scorpio, and is just able to say, this is the linchpin, this is when we pull it, this is the least amount of effort in the most precise place that we need to tip the scales of balance at the correct time for maximum results. And you can only do that when you're seeing it from a bigger perspective. And I think that that's what Hecate is doing in this myth, is she knows, she has seen what was, what is, what will be. And she's just kind of rattling on with her keys, walking down her road of life, being like, the web weaves, the wheel turns, everything will right itself. Don't worry about it.
Perfect. Wow. We could talk all day, Sam. We could, like, I love this. And thank you all in the chat for the donations. Thank you, Moon Me Astrology, for the super chat, and Lisa for the super chat, and Suzanne. I really appreciate all your support. Thank you for helping. You know, what you're doing is you're buying, you know, me the time to do some of this research and to continue to have, you know, create that oracular space. So thank you so much for those donations, folks. And make sure that you support Sam and the work that he does too by signing up for a reading with him. You said that you have classes that are coming later, right?
I've actually got some pre-recorded on my site. But yeah, I think what we as people in the astrology community kind of need to do is just enjoy each other's work, and let that be kind of the focus, regardless of what level. Like, it doesn't even necessarily need financial compensation. Again, like Cancer skirting around the money issue.
Well, I'm enjoying your work today, Sam. So, all right. I think that was a beautiful interpretation of Hecate. The last thing I will say about that is that in some of my meditations around that Persephone myth, I was seeing the theme of the triple goddess, as some authors were talking about that both Kore, Persephone, and Hecate were sort of similar reflections, or not similar, but they were reflections of Demeter herself. They were Demeter in different forms. Like Kore was the green corn, Persephone is the ripe ear, and then we have Hecate as the harvested corn. So really getting into that cyclical theme that we see repeated with the waxing and waning of the moon each month as well. So thank you, William, for the super chat.
Sure.
So Sam.
One of the other, actually Carolyn Elliott in her book, Existential Kink, talks about spiritual development on like the rawest and raunchiest terms. And she brings up the idea of Kore and Persephone being essentially the same and Hades, like in the divine dance, like they are all the same person. And so that contrast creates lack, but also, you know, in returning to yourself and claiming your power in the darkest depths of who you are, you know, you are all players on the stage simultaneously. And that kind of divine interconnection, like we love to see the separateness, we love to see the full moon, the Cancer opposing Capricorn, but at the end of the day, like we are all each other's worst enemies, you know, just from our own internal perspective. Like we are every actor on the stage.
And I think that theme actually repeats in at least Greek mythology as well, because Zeus is not just Zeus. Like Zeus was also Poseidon and Hades. Like they're all Zeus. Like so they're all just different versions of Zeus on some level, which I think is pretty cool. And as you're pointing out with Kore and Persephone and Hecate there as well. Okay.
Like last, to kind of cap that off, the idea that, you know, these full moons are really great times to experience the discord and experience the separateness and the otherness. But then ultimately, like, especially when that new moon rolls around, we need to remember that nothing stays separate forever. Nothing is ever gone for good. Like it's all just dancing around and will eventually return.
Well, and this too shall pass, right? So the tension is going to eventually get released. You know, this tension between maybe aspiring out of the ocean, and then this intuitive need to return. it's all part of the same dance, isn't it? So,
Sure.
okay, let's move forward to the square
Mm.
and touch on that briefly. So
Yeah.
this is January the 25th. I guess before that, I'm gonna back something up just real quick, and then we'll touch on this. So just a few things that are going to be happening between this square and between the full moon and the square. We've got the Kazemi of hold on a second. No, what is on the 18th here? Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. The 18th is actually a pretty big day. This is where we see the nodes are going to be shifting into Taurus and Scorpio, respectively. North node into Taurus, south node into Scorpio. Uranus is going to be stationing direct on this day, so you can see that on the 19th, all of those things have happened. And then we're moving towards the Kazemi of Mercury on the 23rd, and then we'll have Mars moving into Capricorn, as you were pointing out earlier, on the 24th. So you can see this is what's playing out. We've got this nodal shift. We then have Mercury coming into the heart of the sun, giving us some kind of download and the information that we may not have at this full moon, but we may be receiving.
Right.
And then we get to move forward maybe and take action with that long range view with an exalted Mars, because that Mars is like, all right, it's go time. Right.
And this is the right action that we can only take after we have the information lit up by that Mercury Kazemi. And this is something I see so much in astrology sessions, is everybody wants to know, when can I act? I need to make these moves. And the stars will always say, like, you don't have the information yet. Like, the time needs to turn a little bit. Pieces need to move on the board before you even realize why this is a bad decision.
This is something that I really love doing in client work too, Sam, is from my study of the I-Ching, which is one of my favorite oracles. It's just so, it's honest with you. You can't escape your truth with the I-Ching. But what I love about the I-Ching is that I feel like there's always something that you can do, even if it's doing nothing. Does that make sense? Even if it's preparing for the return of the opportune moment to take action in the physical world. So there's always an opportunity to like feel somewhat of a sense of empowerment, even if you have to wait. Does that make sense? Yep. And I think that that's something that we really should emphasize more as spiritual practitioners or human beings, is that, just because the way is blocked or we don't have enough information doesn't mean we have to feel disempowered by that. Yes, we do have to surrender. That's part of the Hode that Jupiter is asking for right now. That's another Sephirat, which is the divine center of surrendering to, going internal and exploring our own inner labyrinths or our own dream. But you can always do something, even if it's just sitting quietly and preparing yourself for the next, spring, something like that. Maybe it's learning something. Maybe it's like saying, okay, I'm going to take a break today and I'm going to be in my stillness. That is a choice. That's an action. And that's something that was really hard for me to learn for a really long time. But it's so much taking back the things that we generally project onto either another person, onto society, onto fate. Like this is what I see in our industry a lot. People will say, why is this my fate? And that they'll like blame fate. And that's, I really recommend people checking out the I-Ching in depth, because that concept right there can really be liberating. There's liberation in that, in being able to understand that you're just part of this cycle, and what you need will come in time, and you will be more in position to take advantage of whatever is happening, whatever you need to do, by preparing yourself mentally and physically and whatever. Sometimes by letting go of the old forms that you're holding on to that aren't vital anymore, right?
This is something that we see a lot in sports. Before a race, you can't hyper train. If you're causing micro injury, if you're in this hyperinflamed state, you're not going to perform as well. So this idea of concentrated active rest and the choice of non-doing as being a therapeutic intervention for enhancing the long-term result is totally one of those medicinal points.
Totally. Totally. This, yeah, we could talk about that for an hour and a half or longer, because that concept to me is really important. Like the need for rest, the need to be able to compost, to add to the soil, right?
Good word. Yeah.
Right. Because if you continuously plant something and expect it to give abundance, you're gonna eventually, what you're eating has no nutrients,
Right.
has no vitamins.
The soil has to go fallow.
That's right.
Right.
So that might be another thing that we're looking at with this winter season. Thank you, Cookerzilla, for the super chat. I really appreciate. They're saying thanks for the cancer love. Well, here we are. Thank you for being here today and choosing to spend your time with us, because I know in this world of so many different choices to spend your time or to distract ourselves with things, that you being present for our talk here today is a gift as well. So thank you so much. All right, so should we talk just a little bit about this last quarter moon here?
Yep.
So we've got the moon at 5 degrees of Aquarius squaring the moon at 5 degrees of Scorpio, which first thing I'm noticing with this, Sam, is that we've got both the sun and the moon in places that they're not super comfortable. The sun in its exile and the moon in its fall. What do you make of that in this last quarter phase?
I think it's also really interesting because both rulers are doing very well. Mm-hmm. And so Mars is exalted, ruling a fallen moon. And then Saturn is really content and lording over the sun, who's having a bad hair day. And so together, it's like we may be egoically dissatisfied at that moment, but the momentum is already in play. And this is something that I've been telling my clients a lot with 2020, 2021 versus 2022. So in 2020-ish and 2021, we were trying to make moves, but we couldn't, because Saturn was just like, absolutely not. But now that everything is coming into its own, and now that everything is starting to streamline, the divine forces that are moving projects are actually able to exert their influence. Mm-hmm. Now, in the short term, just like us trying to uproot the mangrove, we may not be ready to change. We may not see how things are working out down the road. We may be dissatisfied with the temporary discomfort of things shifting as they do and not being able to see the bigger picture. But Mars in Capricorn and Saturn in Aquarius remind us that everything's not only going to be all right, but there is a plan in place.
Yeah. That makes me think about Saturn and Mars maybe being a little bit more about collective action as well, right?
I love that.
Like seeing that there may be, like you were talking about, there's forces in play that, we as personal points of consciousness are trying to, maybe come into alignment with, and it's a little uncomfortable. It's a little like, oh, this is weird and new, but I think that's the growing pains that we see with any large term or large scale changes that are maybe necessary. We just have to start to kind of come into alignment with that. And human beings are creatures of habit. So I guess what I would add to that is, if I'm thinking about the two decans of this quarter moon, you've got the 5 of Swords and the 5 of Cups. And we have a conflict and a defeat with the sun. And we have this Lord of Sorrow, this mourning, this somebody who is dealing with the grieving process after, maybe even potentially after this conflict. And both of these cards associate. I love that I can talk Sephira with you, but this is Gevura. Yeah. So this is about limitation, right? This is about a container for these energies. And the container for Hesed is on the other side of Hesed. And if we just had this unchecked limitlessness, we wouldn't be able to appreciate it. So there's something in, that's bringing us a limitation or a container for these energies as well. I always tell clients with this placement here, it's important to mourn your loss and to go through that grieving process, to compost, whatever old hunger or desire for forms that aren't vital anymore. but also to shift towards gratitude and to see that if you change this perspective, you can see that there are still two cups that are standing, and that those two cups will lead you across this bridge to the river, across the river to the castle of fulfillment or whatnot. So I think that both acknowledging what you've lost, but then also finding the spiritual strength to have gratitude for what is still in your life and the good things that are still in your life, right? That I think that's going to be important moving forward as well.
This is exactly what Anais, I apologize if I butcher your name, said in the chat. She says, tension is what creates life after all. And this is a perfect example of that, where, moving into Gabura, into the raw frictionless power that comes from discomfort,
Right.
that's very much what we're seeing here. The sun in one of its coldest places, the moon in one of its coldest places, but ruled by forces who are actually doing really okay. So there is this kind of lower level conflict, but if we do kind of rise above it, and not just trying to take the spiritual cop out, because I know that a lot of people try to love and light their way through this bullshit, and that's not what we're suggesting at all.
Yeah.
But the idea of during these points, it really does help to lean into that Aquarius perspective, and to lean into that Martial perspective as well. Like, we create our own destiny, we are the masters of our own fate, we can rise above this and see the bigger picture, if we so choose. If you feel the need to throw an egoic pity party and drown in your grief for a little bit and maybe fill those cups and spill them over, and that's perfectly fine, totally acceptable, but understands that, the events that follow post this grief, with the sun conjoining Saturn to create this massive alignment and refinement, and eventually the moon sweeping around and conjoining Mars, giving us that combustive action potential. I think that, like, just literally the week after, you're going to find your perspective completely changes, and you're going to wonder why you wasted all that energy on grief.
I love that. I love it. I think that the other thing that I'll add to this is that, piggybacking off what you're saying, is that this Saturn during this period of time has gone under the beams of the sun. Mm-hmm. It's made its heliacal setting a few days earlier. That's when a planet is within 15 degrees of the sun. There are different arguments as to what the degree is of that, but basically when you see a planet like Saturn going under the beams, we may have a breakdown in the structures that keep society linked together. The last heliacal setting of Saturn was January 6, 2021. If that date sounds familiar, there was all chaos was breaking loose. And then when the Cazimi happens, this was on January 20th of 2021. That's when a new inauguration was happening. Am I thinking of my years incorrectly? I don't know. That example I always use, all time is starting to blend together now. As much as of an astrologer I am, time has gotten, it's gotten really strange lately. But I think my point is that even if you feel a breakdown in some of the structures of your life, it's about to be renewed a few weeks later, and then you will see the new structures that will be in place when Saturn makes its heliacal rise, when it is separated by 15 degrees. So that maybe hopefully will give people an ability to work through, maybe with some patience, some of the necessary breakdowns and building back up that we might see with this as well.
Likewise, by that time, Saturn will not only be out of that kind of period of light and darkness, but also around that time, the sun will be conjoining Jupiter. And that will be a whole new ball of wax.
Ooh, wow, yes.
To unpack. So we're going from the extreme astringency of Saturn and those lessons to kind of the tidal waves and tsunamis of Jupiter. And that's going to be just polar opposite.
I'm very curious to see what happens at that March 2nd new moon in Pisces, because Jupiter is going to be really dignified and really close to that. So we'll see what that brings.
To give you an example, using my chart as an example, Jupiter is really big in my chart. It also rules my second house of finance. And so that new moon and that moon Jupiter conjunction in my fifth house of creativity will actually, I'll be over in the UK at that time doing my biggest workshop in London.
Wow.
So in and of itself, like I planned that trip and I was like, I just made an election without, without like looking at that. And that's how astrology is so vital and why it's a excellent reflective divination tool. Is we can speculate all day long, but when you look at the transits in your life and how they manifest, it creates this profound realization that there is some fate to this whole dynamic, and that it will get better, and that there is a plan, a method behind the madness.
Absolutely. 100%. I just want to give a shout out to Jody for a generous super chat. Thank you so much, Jody. I always appreciate seeing you here in these chats and working with you as well. Susanna says the I-Ching also always tells you what you need to hear. I agree. It is both a very enlightening oracle and a brutal one at times. It is very honest. You can't beat around the bush with the I-Ching. It's going to be like, oh yeah, you're screwing up. Like, take a time out. Like, but again, sometimes it's what we need to hear, right? And there's so much wisdom within that. My favorite translation of the I-Ching is by someone named Jack Balkin. It's called The Laws of Change. It's really great. I'm staring at it on my shelf right now. I'm not going to go get it, but really highly recommend that translation. Let me see. Anais says, stillness as action is a concept we need to internalize. I feel Jupiter and Neptune will help us with that in Pisces. I hope so. I hope that we can come into alignment with stillness. Jody says, thank you guys. I have to get back to work. Oh, well, Sam, hear my thank you. Well, thank you, Jody, if you're listening later. I'll catch the rewatch. Great today. Nice to meet Sam. And then Aeneas is saying, Lisa, it's been tough. Yeah, we'll find more inner balance for summer, hopefully. I hope so. I don't know. As much as I have a little bit of a window into the future with astrology, I find myself continuously actually still surprised by the manifestations of it. And I think that sense of wonder is something that I hope that I will never lose doing this work, because that wonder is a reflection, I think, of me trying to remain humble in the face of the divine plan, that I get a peek into it, but yeah. I'm not like the originator of it, and or like I'm co-creating, or however you wanted to look at it. But I think that there is some humility that comes in of saying, oh, well, yeah, we have a pretty good idea, but we can still be surprised by the actual manifestation. So I do hope, though, for everyone's sake, that we do get a little bit of relief by the summer. I've been kicking around ideas that I think that we may have to see Saturn leave Aquarius before we really get the true relief.
I agree.
But okay. So I'm not the only one thinking that. Okay.
I think for me specifically, like the big transit that comes to mind is we have the Sun conjoining Jupiter in March, but then as we get towards end of May, we have Mars in Aries conjoin Jupiter in Aries, and that is not a slowdown period.
No.
So I think that overall, and then Jupiter will be going retrograde, kind of revisiting all of that heat, all of that combustive Aries fire. And I think we are still kind of in the thick of it. But again, I look back and I'm like, I don't know how like I'm still trying to unpack everything that the Capricorn stelliums and that meat grinder period really kind of poured onto me. So for me, like, again, when you're used to eating gruel for 2 years, like, stale bread and some warm soup sounds pretty divine.
That's true.
And so I think we're in a much better place overall astrologically, and we just need to learn to kind of lean into the strength that is now present in the stars, whereas before we had so much kind of stop signs just everywhere.
Yeah, I think that, just an example of this, and then I'll move forward, is I think that, yes, we're seeing the numbers, with, COVID and Omicron and things like that skyrocket. But I do think we have some protection from like getting vaccinated. And, if people were vaccinated, they were not seeing them end up in the hospital as much. And that's a very different situation than we saw in early 2020, in some of those things. And I know that there's differences of opinion about vaccines and things like that, but that could be one perspective of an example of how we do have some of these divine protections maybe in place now that we didn't have earlier in this cycle. Okay, moving forward. So I'm going to just show where we're getting to as far as this new moon here. Thanks all for hanging out with us today. We've got we won't spend a lot of time on this, but before we get to that awesome new moon in Pisces, we got one more new moon in Aquarius. And I actually, I want to announce here that Gary Caton will be joining me on the 27th of January to talk about this new moon in Aquarius in depth. But this is right before we have the Saturn Cazimi. We've got kind of 6 of swords energy here, where we're having communication between the center and the periphery. Any like really quick thoughts about that new moon that we're heading towards with this cycle?
Again, like the idea of not yet, because Mercury is still just about to end that retrograde period. Mars will conjoin Venus, and what I'm looking forward to is that Mars-Venus conjunction at the beginning of February, around the 15th, mid-month. Because what I think, as they conjoin and as they basically hold hands and just usher each other through Aquarius, it's going to be this great partnership that's going to bring so much ease and action through ease.
Sure.
But as Mercury gets released and starts to speed up, I think we're still in that mental reflection period. We're still halfway through that contemplation of what exactly are we doing? Why is it not working? Figuring out the nuts and bolts. And also the idea of that the Saturn still underneath the rays, and being eclipsed by the sun. So this new moon is trying to find answers. It's trying to find emotional centeredness. It's trying to go within and search for those answers. But those answers are literally, the process of looking for answers is eclipsing the Lord of the new moon. So it's just, take your time. Do not look too hard for answers that are not ready to emerge.
Great advice for anything that we have with Saturn involved, right? It's not a quick fix. There's Saturn gives its rewards after continual effort over the long haul, right?
And
so
thankfully, just a few days later, you don't even need to wait that long. We have the Saturn Sun Cazimi. So
yeah,
it's not going to be very long after that new moon, but I think that the normal kind of refreshed perspective that we're looking for at that new moon still won't be fully cooked yet.
Yeah, right here on February 4th, you can see that that's the Cazimi, or the conjunction of the Sun and Saturn, which is renewing the vitality of Saturn, if we can call it vitality. It's kind of an oxymoron or paradox a little bit, but it is renewing the spirit and energy that Saturn is going to be working with. So hang in there at that new moon. Only a couple days later, you've got this infusion of solar energy into Saturn. Okay, Anise is saying, I'm watching through my window, an eagle flying. All right, well, there you go. Zeus is with you today.
And Hollis, I said warm soup, not worm soup.
Right. So worm soup. It feels like we've been eating worm soup on some level.
Yeah, definitely.
But maybe we need some worm soup so we can get to the depths of things, right? Like, I bet actually worms are pretty nutritious. So
yeah, exactly. Again, like eating something that is eating that gruel, eating what is disgusting, right, just in order to get baseline nutrients.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to stop my share for a minute here, and we will finish off this wonderful conversation. Thanks again, Sam. You are a joy to have here on the show. You are a fountain of knowledge, and I am honored to be having this conversation with you today.
Likewise.
So we have a couple more symbols for all of you out there in digital land. I like to pull an animal symbol for the show and an I-Ching. And then Sam is going to tell me what you're pulling today for us.
A geomantic figure.
Okay. Do you want to do that first, or do you want to go through the animal and the I-Ching first?
Animal and I-Ching.
Okay, so the animal that we had today is the owl. And the owl is interesting because the owl is a nocturnal animal. It has some significations with wisdom and being able to see things that others can't. It is a very adaptable animal that will store things that it has caught that are in excess in its cache or cache, or how do you say that word? Cache. Okay. So, it's very interesting to me. They're also silent flyers. So they hunt in a very silent way. So I think this speaks to whatever we're doing right now. We don't have to be bombastic about it. We can kind of observe from all different perspectives. They can also rotate their necks 270 degrees to be able to see from all these different perspectives. So I think that it's important to listen. They have exceptional hearing. I think that it's important to pay attention to the omens in your life. They are associated with omens, but also sometimes of a symbolic death. So to be able to, let go of the things that are no longer serving you in your life. What do you think? Other owl thoughts?
Owls are associated with the goddess Athena, goddess of wisdom. And also owls, although they are silent creatures, their shrieks are extremely piercing. So it's that idea of when to keep silent.
Right. I like that. Some of their main food sources are mice. So I think that we need to consume some of the details of our lives. One interesting fact is that the great horned owl can actually eat skunks because they do not have a very well developed sense of smell. So maybe there's something that you can consume that if you avoid the stinkiness of it, or avoid sort of the, maybe, I don't know, what we would consider a skunk scent, maybe the more emotional, pungent leaking of emotions. If we're able to be objective, like Saturn is asking us to do, we may be able to consume something that is nourishing to us, and it may not be available if we were to get too fixated on, the smell of it.
Also, the mice that the owl kind of ingests, it only digests what is most appropriate, and then it regurgitates all of the parts and all of the bits that are beyond its capability. And so it is that kind of choosy digestion, really making sure to only take on what is most necessary.
But we may need to swallow all of it first. Right? Maybe we take it out, we take in the information, we utilize what is, nutritious, and then we reject what doesn't work for us. And that can be something too. Like, if you're able to see something from all the different perspectives, it doesn't mean you have to agree with every single perspective, but as long as you've held enough space for it, then you can take what will be useful for you and get rid of, regurgitate like the pellets of our lives. Okay, so that's the owl. And let me see, we've got some owl comments. Hollis is saying worm soup is nutritional too, but not relaxing to humans. May for owls. Yeah, and Raven says, if I remember right, William Lilly says night owls are of the moon. Okay.
Yes, it's a very lunar creature.
Bringing in the lunar signification. Okay. Lisa's talking about the choosy digestion, bringing in Virgo signification. So maybe that's part of the Mercury Cazimi that we're experiencing too. See, we can weave spells here with all of this. Okay, so the I-Ching that we have here is number 37, which translates to the family, the household, the clan, close-knit groups. I highlighted playing your part, establishing expectations, serving as an example, creating mutuality and trust. And two changing lines. The first changing line says, not chasing after whim or desire, remain in the center, prepare the food, perseverance brings good fortune. Any initial thoughts on that first changing line there, Sam? Anything that comes to mind?
I just adore it because we're getting into so much Mercury territory right now, and with birds of flight, with, you know, being picky, being choosy, the food aspect of Virgo coming through again. My geomantic figure, also a mercurial figure. So I think that overall, like, it's this idea of being discerning, of being, you know, mentally open, but also shrewd in your perception. I think maybe the family situation and the things that are a little bit kind of ground level relate to that Sun-Pluto conjunction. And that being kind of the underworld vibe, or the things that are most family oriented, very much fourth house kind of things in the chart, for sure.
Okay, so we've got line number 2 that talks about not necessarily chasing after whim or desire, which I think actually also fits in with this card, right? Where we've gotten our desires satiated in some level, maybe, and are we satisfied with enough? I got a couple notes here. I wrote, cultivating virtues of modesty and moderation, attend to the immediate responsibilities and duties that you have, which I think reflects the Cancer Capricorn equilibrium we're trying to strike. Subordinate ambitions for the good of the group, which I think ties in with the new moon in Capricorn too, where if we got a little bit overly ambitious with maybe some hubris, trying to build our castle to the divine through overly material means, we may need to maybe release some expectations about timing, perhaps. Nourishing others with your abundance. I said share, exclamation point, which I think is always that's always a good lesson, right? Learning to share and not to hoard like King Midas, potentially. And then practicing unselfish devotion to meet the needs of your community. So we move to line number 5, which says, the king approaches his family. Do not worry, good fortune. And this speaks to establishing trust between the leadership and the members of the group, practicing kindness and magnanimity, maintaining dignity and integrity in positions of authority, which I think is important, especially with the Sun-Pluto conjunction that you were highlighting. I wrote down, a great leader serves his followers, right? Use love, not fear, to lead. I think that's important. I saw one other thing I wanted to mention before we talk about your geomantic divination. And I was really affected by this art installation, and I shared this on my Instagram. And
Yes, I love that one.
I had to bring it up because I want to hear your thoughts on this, because it was so powerful. It's an art installation called Can't Help Myself by Sun Yuan and Peng Yu. And it is a robot that is programmed both to dance, and it has a sweeper attached to a large metal arm. And it's programmed to both dance, but also to leak hydraulic fluid that was made to look like blood. And it has to stop its dancing to sweep the hydraulic fluid back into its body so that it continued to function. And eventually it's kind of slowed down over the years, and it dances less because it has to sweep more fluid back into itself. And holy cow, I just was like, I was stunned by this. This is the first time I saw this, and I just was stunned with all the different things that we could glean from that installation. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Sam.
Obviously, like, as a Cancer person, like, there's no better analogy for our sign than that.
Yeah.
Always trying to serve and trying to self-care, and also trying to make sure that our emotional leakage does not contaminate the world around us, because Cancers are so prone to putting the mother in smother, but also to sacrifice our own self-care for the care of others, and to be overly considerate to the point where we degrade ourselves. And looking at that installation so many times over the years, every time it comes up, I always get the feels for it, because it's such a relatable piece. But what is also so interesting about that piece to me is that, ultimately it's a machine.
Yeah.
It has been programmed to do that. And what we as humans have the luxury of doing is changing our programming. And so although somebody who might look at this exhibit would think, oh, how sad, this creature will never change, we have that luxury. We can take empowerment in that, if we're able to recognize the dance that we're doing.
Yeah, man, I love it. And you know, there's so many layers to that art installation. There's so many different angles you could explore it from. You know, you could think about it as a meditation on capitalism, utilitarianism, as you know, losing our utility as we get older and being cast aside, you know, by society, is something to think about. You could also think about too, this is my biggest takeaway, is realizing that time continues to march on. And as much as we may try to contain entropy, you know, that we all are going to die someday. That is reality. But that doesn't mean we need to despair. It means that because we are aware of that death, it maybe, like you were saying, that the robot might not even be aware of that death. We can choose to utilize that time that we have in the best way possible, right? And find out what is meaningful for us, right? What gives meaning to our life. If you're aware of your own mortality, how are you going to utilize that time? Right. And I think that really speaks very well to the hexagram that 37 is changing to, which is called great accumulation, number 26, great amassing, strengthening up, preparing, gathering knowledge, sweeping in hydraulic fluid, cultivating your abilities, improving yourself, waiting for the right moment. So I think by doing some of these small actions and you know, practicing these daily rituals of gratitude, that adds up to big things too. You know, like I think that's what I appreciate about your work is, you know, you were, you know, reflecting that you appreciate about what I do. I think we both have this ability to show up and to keep showing up. And it's not through one grand action. It's through many small actions that we're building something that hopefully will live beyond us, right? That will be something, turn into a grand structure that will benefit, you know, our community. And I think that was so hard for me to realize as a young person. I always thought I had to do something so grandiose, but the real crux of it is just showing up every day and doing what is necessary in that moment for that day. And that adds up to grace, I think. All right. So, Sam, tell me about your geomantic figure. And teach me about this a little bit, because this is new to me.
Yeah, so geomancy and astrology are actually really kind of interconnected. I first heard it dropped by Caitlin Kopic at NORWAC, the last in-person NORWAC that we had. And I was curious about it and started researching books on it. And it's the idea of casting lots, very similar to the I-Ching, but calculating those lots in sets of 4 as even or odd. And then based on the dots of 1 or 2 in 4 rows, you create this figure, which is then expanded upon, applied to the houses, and you create a dual system of kind of astrological divination that is separate from electional astrology, which I really enjoy. But it can also be used just to cast a lot over the most simple things. And so what I did when I focused on kind of the full moon and what the core of the lesson was, the figure that I got was Albus, which is the geomantic figure named after the Latin word for white. It is a symbol kind of like Albus Dumbledore in Harry Potter, kind of that teacher figure, often associated with Mercury and Gemini, who is a little bit of a trickster. So a lot of the flight themes, a lot of the air themes, a lot of the communication themes that we've been seeing, very much Albus. It is a sign of beginnings. So you think you're at the end of the journey when really you're just starting. And the idea of like, Albus is a figure that is ultimately positive, but contemplative. It's not hyper aggressive in its actions. It's very satisfied and slightly curious, you know, but not necessarily a figure that we would say dictates action, but also like not just sitting back and doing nothing, a nice in between.
Sounds very wintry, you know?
Yeah, a little bit.
You know? Like we could think about it as the reflective qualities of, you know, slowing down during these colder months, although, you know, Not all of us live in Florida. Like, no, I think that that's a beautiful reflection. What are some books that you really like on this technique? Because I'm always curious about books and sources and where to
Sure.
start with that. If someone would want to dive deeper into this technique.
So basic primer 101 is The Art and Practice of Geomancy by John Michael Greer, who wrote one of the first editions of the Pictrix.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So check that out. Check out Sam. I'm checking in the chat box here. I think we have some good comments about owls, about Virgo. Hollis is trying to understand Cancers and Virgos. Is that because you're a Capricorn? I don't know. I think that sometimes when you have energy that is potentially opposite to you, like a Cancer and Capricorn, it requires flexibility and listening and things of that nature. How are Cancers and Virgos alike? Well, what do you think, Sam? What would you say to that?
I think what Cancers and Virgos do really well is problem solving and firefighting. They're excellent in a chaotic situation because they both know how to put the situation first. Virgo tends to be overly anxious and will create its own problems if not able to solve one at every given moment. So Virgo would be kind of considered a little bit more restless, whereas at its worst, Cancer goes the emotional route and becomes more smothering and doty and hyper attached when it does not receive love for its heroic action during times of chaos and strife. So I think they're similar because they both are trying to help. They are both very different because when they burn out, they collapse in very different ways.
Yeah, I think service orientation is important. I think both of those signs ultimately, like you said, want to be fixers, want to fix a situation. And I think Virgo does it maybe a little bit more tangibly. And the support that a Cancerian, placement might provide may be more emotional support or more like nurturing in that nature. It doesn't mean that a Cancer can't be practical or a Virgo can't be emotional. It's just those are some of the archetypes. I hope that helps, Hollis. I think the other thing that both Cancer and Virgo like to do is teach. So I always enjoy getting these questions in here, and hopefully this channel is a learning channel as well, where people are getting more than just the basic transits and the energy that we're experiencing, but hopefully going in depth enough that they can learn astrology or divination or whatever system that we're exploring as well. Well, Sam, I think we did it. I think we got through it. We went a little bit over today, but this was such a good conversation. I didn't want it to end here. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your time. Tell us again where we can find you, and tell us one more time things that you have that are coming up for you where we can support you.
Sure. Just sambelyea.com. I'm also on YouTube. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Just be a part of the conversation. I've got online classes. I provide consults. I specialize in medical astrology, but just like Spencer said, just hang around, just absorb it, just be a part of the community. And what Spencer's doing, exposing you to all these different astrologers, it's so wonderful because astrology needs to be personal, and you're not going to get along with everybody. But if you find somebody that really resonates with you, their speech patterns, the way that they think, the way that they explain about it, it's just important to find some sort of family in the work.
I love that. I love bringing the family back into it, because that's one of the things that I find the most joy in, is just having these conversations and being able to share wisdom. And I do love exposing a new audience to these brilliant minds such as yourself. And I think that I'm going to echo what you said and just say, if we support one another rather than make it like this kind of like who's climbing the mountain fast enough, that provides a healthier community for everyone. And ultimately, if our goal is to help bring people closer to the Tao or the divine or to spirit or to their truth, then I think that we're better served doing it together than doing it as little islands, so.
And I would argue that astrology that does the opposite of that is eventually going to tumble.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So Thank you, Sam. And everybody, please check out Sam's work. Support him on Facebook and YouTube and his website. If you're interested in learning more about the Capricorn archetype, you can sign up for my webinar at spencermichaud.com. That's going to be this Saturday, January the 15th at 1 p.m. And yeah, speaking of community, Stormy Grace is doing a pretty cool thing, raising money to provide free astrology education and bring multiple teachers together. So if you want to contribute to that, there is a link in the description of this video as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Thank you, Sam. This was wonderful. Hopefully, you'll join me again. This is great. And we'll see you all the next time. Take care, everyone. Peace.